Why should I follow God when I face persecution? And some have that mindset. But again, that passage reminds us that through all of those things, and notice what he says, in all these things, in verse 37, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. And he goes on from there, of course. And so, look at verse 13 again. God crushes the head of the leader. It says, you crush the head of the house of the wicked, laying him bare from thigh to neck. And so God crushes the head of the leader of the wicked there. And if you say it maybe another way, paraphrasing it, maybe in terminology that would be contemporary to our day, you might say, as a commentary, you might call it. God turns the tables on the wicked. They may think they have everything figured out. They may think they have the advantage. They may think that, I have these Christian people. I have things in hand. The wicked think they may have the upper hand. They think they're powerful. They're the ones ruling over all the earth. But again, the wicked think they may be getting away with their oppression and the evil and the wickedness that they may be participating in. But we know in the long run what happens. God crushes, in essence, the head of the wicked. And so again, one of the things that we should do, obviously, when we see a passage like this, is hopefully be captivated by just how powerful and great and protective our God is. And he's at work on behalf of his people. And we know that God is on our side. And again, that question from Romans chapter 8, if God is for us, who can be against us? Meaning what? We can trust in God. And we need to remember that. Okay. Let's go ahead and go, I guess, to the next point. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't give you that slide, but you can look at it for a minute. I think we covered all of those. Okay. Next, let's look at what we'll call full faith, verses 16 through 19 of Habakuk chapter 3. And these are just 4 verses, but they finish out this book of Habakuk. And they reveal the faith, the true faith and emotions of Habakuk himself. Habakuk reveals in this prayer that when he heard God's message of judgment, notice what he says. He says in verse 16, look how he describes it when he hears about this and how it affected him even physically speaking. He said, my body trembled, his lips quivered, his legs trembled, and rottenness entered his bones. You might say he's distraught, right? When he hears about what's going to happen, and he knows from the Lord that his people are going to be punished for their rebelliousness. They refused again to turn back to God, to repent, to turn from their wickedness. And when he hears that what God is going to really do through the Chaldeans or the Babylonians, that's his, physical reaction. And there are times probably in your life where you may have had a similar reaction to something that has occurred in your life. And usually it's, again, when you're just totally distraught. You don't know how to act. You hate to bring back those memories to anyone, but again, those might be compared to the way that Habakuk felt when he heard what was going to happen to his people. And again, he's distraught at the news that he hears. I think back, I'll give you a personal example of that. When many of you remember about 3 or 4 years ago when Brother Dane Miner was in his accident. And my wife and I were at the hospital that night. And we didn't know much about his injury at that time. And very severe. And he's done great in his recovery. But that night, there was a family that came in. I didn't know this family at all. But we were sitting there in the room. And I actually went out in the hall because there were so many of them. But it was like 4 adult daughters. And they had kids from teenagers on down. And there was a husband that was there. And their mother had just been passed away. And we found out later she had actually been killed by a son of hers, I think. And this family was so distraught. Nobody's there to comfort them. There wasn't anything that they could say to each other that would help. And they realized at that time that they had lost their mother, perfectly healthy woman, but it was just a crushing experience for them. And I tell you what, Denise and I both that night, as we were sitting there in the midst of all this, we both physically were sick. I mean, we got lightheaded. I mean, it was just, crushing for anyone that was around, the emotion that was in the hospital in that area at that time. And it was very overwhelming. And again, people I didn't even know, but you could see the pain in all their faces, the expressions, of grief at learning that their mother had passed away and had been essentially killed. And some of them knew that, I would understand. But again, a horrible situation. And when I read something like that, I think about a time like that when it's just so overwhelming. Your body physically reacts to the news that you hear, and you're distraught in that way. And again, so, that really pictures Habakkuk. He's not a Superman that isn't affected by emotion and things that are going to occur. He cared deeply for the people. And he knew that they were going to suffer horribly for their own choice to be rebellious against God, yet it still affected him. He wasn't one that said, well, they get what they deserve. They made that choice, so be it. He wasn't cold-hearted in that way at all, but he cared deeply for the people. You think about Jesus as he looked over Jerusalem, right? And Jesus of all, he knew the people, many of them had rebelled against him, but what was his emotion toward the whole city of Jerusalem? He loved them deeply, right? And he essentially cried over their rejection of him and rejection of God's message. And again, that in many ways is the way it seems that Habakkuk is responding to this news of what's going to happen. The message took his breath away, you might say. But Habakkuk reveals total fear. And notice at the end of verse 16, he says, yet, through all this, even though my physical reaction is in this way, yet, he says, I will quietly wait for the day of trouble to come upon the people who invade us. And further, Habakkuk understands the total loss that's going to occur. Verse 17, he goes over this fig tree won't blossom, fruit won't be on the vines, and he goes through all this. I'm going to go through this quickly since we're running out of time. Really what that would be for us today. There's no food now, and there's no hope of food in the future. Things are dry up. They're going to dry up. They're not going to be there. In our case, it might be there's no jobs that are going to be available. We can't look forward to that hope immediately of those jobs occurring. You might say that in our case, money is going to be taken away. And there's not going to be the avenue or the ability to go out and make money to support the family. There's nothing that's going to be able to sustain the people of God because the wrath of God is coming. And again, through choices they've made to rebel against God, that protection for that time is not going to be there anymore. And the hope that it will in the future, but immediately in the short-term future, it's not going to be there. And again, you think about what our reaction would be if, again, there is no hope at all. And that's something that Habakkuk seemed to understand. And again, there's total fear of what's going to happen. Again, he says, yet, as you go back to it, I will quietly wait for the day of trouble to come upon the people who invade us. He's able to just take a step back and say, I'm going to trust in God. And in verses 18 and 19, he says, notice what he says again. After all these things are going to occur and there's no hope in the immediate future, and this is really amazing, he says, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. God, the Lord, is my strength. And this is an important point. I read one commentary and I thought this is an important point that hopefully we can think about. Habakkuk does not say, in this case, that though he will lose everything, he's going to tough it out. He doesn't say that he's going to hang in there the best of his ability in all this turmoil. But what Habakkuk does say, I'm going to rejoice in the Lord no matter what. As bad as I know it's going to be, I'm still going to rejoice in the Lord. And that's pretty powerful and pretty strong statement. And it's one that's powerful for us today also. He says that I'll take joy in my God. It's not just toughing things out. It's not just enduring. I mean, we do that, but that's not all that's involved from the get-go. We understand that no matter what comes in life, whatever circumstances, I am going to rejoice in the Lord. We've touched on that throughout the book of Habakuk. But no matter what happens, we need to have that. I think I mentioned this last 3 weeks. That determination. We don't know what's coming in the future, but whatever comes, we need to have that determination to stay faithful to God. And that's what he expects of his people. And it may be hard, but Habakkuk is going to find joy in the Lord. And that's his determination. And verse 19 really does explain how he can do that. His strength is found in the Lord. God is his strength. God will carry him through all the things that are going to happen. And Habakkuk not only believes that he's going to make it through all of this, but he believes he'll make it through, notice, like a deer that's leaping in high places. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me tread on my high places. And so, despite all the difficulties, Habakkuk expects, again, to ascend on high, you could say. And really, the application for us could be, no matter what happens, we can expect, as faithful Christians, that God is going to be there for us and that we will be rewarded. And sometimes it may not be pretty to think about the book of Revelation and what that tells those Christians in the first century. It goes even so far as to say, yeah, some of you are going to be persecuted to the point that you die because of your faith in God. But the promise in Revelation is found that those that are faithful to the Lord will be rewarded through eternity. And again, another powerful message that we're not promised. Everything's going to, circumstances in our life are going to be perfect in any way. Some do face harsh circumstances. And we don't hope or wish that or pray for that on anyone, of course. But when they do come, if they do come, again, we can still have that mindset. Whatever happens, we need to stay faithful to God. You know, it's amazing as a minister, and I know those of you who've been members of the church for a long, long period of time, it's amazing to see those who exemplify this very thought, that although they face the deepest valleys of life, I mean, you can look at those individuals and see they're faithful to God. You know, they may be shaking a little bit, perhaps, but it seems through all the difficulties they may have faced that they have been faithful to God, and they've chosen to do that, and they'll continue always. Sadly, there are also those that we may know that have left the Lord when they face those valleys of life. So again, hopefully we can say with Habakkuk that even in any kind of fear and suffering, that we can trust in God and we can rejoice in God always. And if we can't rejoice in the Lord and say the Lord is our strength, even in those days that we would consider dark in many ways, it really does reveal, as it would have been with these people of God in the Old Testament, what that would have revealed is they were tied to the things of life. You think about how that applies to us today. You know, if we're putting trust in something other than God, again, things that we've seen throughout this letter of this writing, wealth, knowledge, wisdom, power, our decisions, and we're thinking those things will carry us through the difficult days without God, then again, we're sadly mistaken. So 2 things I'll leave you with. What do we do when we finally open our eyes and realize that life is not in our hands totally, and we're not in total control? God is. You got 2 choices, and hopefully I'll make the right one. The first one is that we can either try to carry all the weight on our shoulders and figure things out on our own. And most of the world, that's the choice they make. You know, those that just keep putting more weight on their shoulders, they suffer pain and suffering, or they have pain and suffering in their life. And finally, what's going to happen, of course, is that building collapses and they're in the rubble. Trying to carry all the weight on our own by ourselves is really not something we as people can succeed at. The second choice that you have, of course, is just like Habakkuk expresses, that we can trust in God completely. Will our circumstances improve tremendously? We don't know. It may not. You think, again, I went back to Paul last week on the thorn in the flesh. God didn't take it away. You know, he expected Paul to understand that his grace was made perfect even in weakness. But again, we can stop in doing that when we trust in God. We can stop trusting ourselves, the wealth that we may have accumulated. We can stop trusting in our intelligence and ability to figure things out on our own, again, without God. You could say, get out of the boat, start to walk by faith, as we find in one New Testament example. We can trust God to find that joy and strength even in the most difficult of days. And hopefully, if we don't let our joy and strength be found in other things rather than God, then we can find that peace that is offered through God and through Jesus Christ today. We're at the end of the class, and I appreciate you coming today. I know I lectured the whole time. I was trying to get through Habakkuk. Siri did not interrupt me this week. That was good. You know, it's funny. I was thinking, 7 years I've been using an iPad for notes and Bible readings. Never has that happened, except last week it did. So whatever I said, it woke her up. And I turned her off this week, so she can't speak up. So anyway, if you don't know what Siri is, you can see me later, I guess, right? Ask anybody that has any kind of phone or iPad. Anyway, thank you for being here. Remember, next week we'll all be in the auditorium for a devotional for the next 2 weeks. And then we'll have class 3 weeks from tonight in here. Thank you very much.